Hey everybody, this is Off Leash with Erik Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. We did it. We did it. An amazing victory by Donald Trump in the 2024 presidential election. As of this taping, he's at 277 electoral votes, definitely on his way towards 306, maybe 312. And significantly, the popular vote. Donald Trump won the popular vote, the first president to do so, the first Republican to do so in 20 years. What an outcome. Erik, we've been talking on Off Leash all year about what if Donald Trump becomes president? Well, what about if the next Trump administration? We made it. We're here.
Yep.
Extraordinary result.
There's being in the opposition and there's governing. Unfortunately, the Biden administration has left him an absolute mess, a car wreck of foreign policy and economic policy, massive debts, inflation, rising interest rates. It's going to be a hole to be dug out of.
You know, it's amazing to me that if you look back, he's going to be so much more successful having not had a second term start in 2021, but starting now. You know, because look how much more we know today than we knew 4 years ago.
Yes, but I would have rather not inflicted the economic damage on the United States.
Yeah, for sure. Or
but we're here now.
The damage in the world.
And now it's time to start patching.
Yeah, exactly. So what an outcome. Finally, you know, we can have a discussion about the wreckage that is befallen the world because of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's fecklessness and their weakness. I was thinking about the time frame, in fact, of, you know, the Afghanistan withdrawal. The disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal took place in August of 2021, merely 7 months after Joe Biden took office. Yep. And it was
it set the tone.
It set the tone. And then between August and of 2021, March of 2022 is when Putin invaded Ukraine.
Yep.
I mean, we're talking about what, 7, 8 months?
You think they didn't smell weakness?
So that tells you everything you need to know. So what I would like to do for our viewers is I want to take a little tour of the world. Now that we are post-election day 2024, I want them to get your perspective on where we go from here. So let's start right there. Let's start with Russia and the Ukraine war. And I want to share with you a couple of quotes following Donald Trump's victory. First, from Zelensky. Congratulations to Donald Trump on his impressive election victory. I recall our great meeting with President Trump back in September when we discussed in detail the Ukraine-U.S. strategic partnership, the victory plan, and ways to put an end to Russian aggression against Ukraine. For a little comparison, let's go to what came out of the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, said Trump had made some important statements about wanting to end the Ukraine war during his campaign, but only time would tell if they led to action. Here's his quote. Quote, let us not forget that we are talking about an unfriendly country which is both directly and indirectly involved in a war against our state in Ukraine. Peskov went on to say, we've repeatedly said that the U.S. is able to contribute to the end of this conflict. This cannot be done overnight, but the U.S. is capable of changing the trajectory of its foreign policy. Will this happen? And if so, how? We will see after January. So let's start with the Ukraine war and where we need to go from here.
The neocons wanted us to believe that victory was imminent, that it was just around the corner if we just spent another 50, 100, 250 odd billion dollars. That is clearly not going to happen. The important inflection point has been reached in the Ukraine war that they are losing more men in combat every day than they can even possibly hope to regenerate. So they've been fighting a attrition game for the last 2 years now, and it's just math. And when you have an opponent that much larger that can generate the force and the manpower and grind away, that's what's happening. And so the Ukrainians have lost more territory in the last couple months than they've lost in 18 months of battle. You're now coming into a cold phase where it's possible for armored units to maneuver. So they're going to be, cold, frozen ground now, December, January, February, exceedingly dangerous time for them to lose even more land. And if they're not careful, they're going to lose everything east of the Dnieper River, right up until Kiev. If they lose Odessa on the southern coast, it's really not even viable as a country anymore. So it is in the interest of the Ukraine's longevity to bring this to an end, to give up the fool's errand that they say they're going to reclaim all the East. What the Russians have asked for was pretty much a freezing of lines, but that they would govern Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Crimea. Crimea is theirs already, but
Lost.
to govern those other areas for 20 years and then have some kind of plebiscite. Fine. Whatever. It was a fool's errand and unnecessarily provocative to keep offering, thinking, stating, even Kamala Harris in the Munich Security Conference. Before, like a month before the Russians invaded, she was wafting the idea of Ukraine joining NATO. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Imagine if the Russians were offering to make Nuevo Leon, Mexico, where Monterrey is, right across from Texas.
Right.
Part of some, not BRICS, but even a military alliance with the Soviet Union with Russian advisors. Of course, no. Or in Tijuana.
Right.
Like, no.
Never.
So bringing this to a close is in the interest of the West. And I met with a head of state recently who's been to every BRICS meeting since the beginning. And they said this last one, which occurred just a month ago in Sochi, Russia, and they said it was the first time that Putin seemed in a more subservient junior role to Xi from China. And that is bad. It has been the policy goal of the United States to keep German industry out of combining with Russian resources. And all we've done is push Russian resources, massive, into the much bigger industrial hands of the Chinese Communist Party. That is not in the interest of the United States of America, period.
Yeah, it's the antithesis of Nixon's, policy.
Yep. So,
right? It's the exact
again,
opposite.
I'm hoping that Trump and Putin can sit down somewhere and talk and make a deal and say this is how it's going to be.
So Zelensky must recognize the gravy train is over, right? I mean, he even recently got $60 billion extra dollars.
He is right, and he has suspended democracy. He hasn't been an elected leader since April or May. He's literally suspended any kind of democratic process there. It's important to note that even during the American Civil War, our elections went on, right? Lincoln versus McClellan in 1864. So he is, constitutionally not even seen as legitimate in their government. Fine, he's there. He has huge political pressure from some sides to not yield an inch, but on the other side, there's a lot of people that are just tired. And when you see the videos of press gangs going out in the streets of any city in Ukraine and forcing people into the bus, it's just not how you want to
here
recruit
we
your
are,
soldiers.
2.5 years in. He has been enabled by Joe Biden.
Enabled by the same
And the
Washington
profligate
military
spending.
industrial complex neocon nonsense, the same thing that we did 20 years in Afghanistan with the same stupid paradigm of lumping ahead and never saying, hey, this is not working, let's tack or let's adjust the boat to some other more productive heading. Nobody's done that. That happens hopefully on January 21.
And there was never a game plan defined. Joe Biden never said, we're going to invest $100 billion more dollars, and here's what it's going to get us, and here's why it's in the national security interest of the United States.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So I want to throw another quote at you following the Trump victory. We heard the Kremlin spokesman quote. This next quote, which you'll find quite interesting, Kirill Dmitriev, the CEO of Russia's sovereign wealth fund and a senior figure in Russia's political elite. Now, so I got to believe you got the Kremlin spokesman, right? But now you got a crony of Putin who's putting out his own statement. He had a very different statement than the one from the Kremlin spokesman. He said that Trump's team had won the presidency and the Senate despite a large-scale disinformation campaign directed against them. Wow. That's a Russian talking. Quote, their convincing victory shows that ordinary Americans are tired of the unprecedented lies, incompetence, and malice of the Biden administration. That's rather distinctive. This opens up new opportunities for resetting relations. A reset. We remember that term from a long time ago, reset with Russia. For resetting relations between Russia and the United States, said Dmitriev, who has regularly met and offered advice to President Putin. So give me your reaction to that quote?
Well, it's interesting. I haven't heard that name since the Mueller investigation, because that's supposedly the guy I met with to create a secret back channel to the Trump administration.
Right.
Although that was, 3 months after the election.
Right.
When I saw that guy one time, had 2 beers with him, and didn't have any contact with him since. Anyway, it's interesting to see that kind of candor for even other countries to see the nonsense of the Washington swamp that has taken America down a very wrong path and not done Ukraine any favors, putting hundreds of thousands of young men into a wood chipper.
But
It's
a Russian
terrible.
talking about a disinformation campaign, I mean, that's classic.
Yeah, look, the
That's
Russians
an
do
amazing
it,
quote.
and the U.S. does it plenty to other countries as well.
Is this a signal from Putin to Donald Trump?
I think so. I think, look, the Russians, if you look at military history, they will grind away until they reach their objective. They lost 22 million people, Soviets, in combat to crush the Nazis. We lost 250,000 in the European theater of operations. America did. So their idea of pain point is way different and higher than ours. And so if you want Ukraine to survive as a viable state, take a deal. Make it just like North and South Korea, and let it be a competition of governance. I'm not saying Russian governance is great and beautiful and magnificent, but clearly North Korea governs differently than South Korea. When you look at an image from space, all the lights are south of the 38th parallel. Let Western Ukraine be a beacon of capitalism, individual liberty, rule of law, all the rest. Make it so that the rest of those somewhat occupied territories want to come back. Make it a competition of governance. It's been a competition of arms. It's a stalemate. It's gone. It's literally stalemated down to a World War I style trench warfare and slaughter. Absolutely no point.
Well,
Make a deal.
and new reports came out showing that some 3,500 North Korea troops were located with the Russians,
Yes.
and that's concerns the Chinese. Now, why don't you explain that?
The North Korea has kind of been the pit bull on a choke chain by the CCP for years. And so for Russia to warm up to North Korea, provide them arms, hopefully not, but possibly some new missile technology in exchange for the arms that North Korea is selling like crazy, and now even manpower. Again, I'm sure Kim is selling them like slaves, cannon fodder, which is what they are to him. And that's a way for the Russians to bolster some of their manning.
So are you optimistic Donald Trump can resolve this conflict, in his words, maybe even before he takes the oath of office?
That would be a fantastic act of diplomacy. And I honestly think the real path back to, again, Russia does not have to be our friend, but they don't have to be our enemy. And NATO existed to counter the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact, which was the Soviet Union, an empire, plus a whole bunch of other countries bolted on as a military alliance. And NATO was stood up to do that. Why NATO really existed past 91? Good question.
At the expense of the American taxpayer and not
A,
to
at
the
the expense,
Europeans.
because it's been a protectorate. It's not really an alliance, A. B, if we had embraced the Soviets, then the Russians, and made them an even closer trading partner, I think they want to be respected because it is a long and significant nation. Look, they had their own space program. They had their own nuclear weapons capability. They had some significant technological developments. They belong with Russia. The United States has far more in common with Europe and Russia than we do with China, Japan, India, or Korea for that matter. Okay? And so bring them into that fold. And I think, honestly, the way to do that even for the climate change people that are super worried that climate is paramount, that it is the most existential threat. There's like 800 gigatons of carbon that the world gives off per year just by natural processes, decaying plankton and stuff. 80 gigatons is by human activity, burning gas in your car, burning your leaves in your yard, whatever. The amount of carbon that can be sequestered by some basic applications in the Russian Siberia will more than offset that. And so we can get away from all the green mandates that are choking off the rest of Western economies, solve the climate thing, Russia pulls back into the orbit of the West and away from China. That is in our interest. That's what we should do.
Great solution. Let's go to Israel. Let's start with the reaction from Israel to the election of Donald Trump from Benjamin Netanyahu. And it is almost as a love letter, a personal note. Dear Donald and Melania Trump, congratulations on history's greatest comeback. Your historic return to the White House offers a new beginning for America and a powerful recommitment to the great alliance between Israel and America. This is a huge victory in true friendship, yours, Benjamin and Sarah Netanyahu. A powerful recommitment to the great alliance between Israel and America.
You know what else he did yesterday? He fired his defense minister, Yoav Gallant.
On election day.
On election day.
Give us the meaning.
Easy to bury in the media. He was an opposition guy, and so one of the problems, IDF does not have enough soldiers, and they're not able to draft any of the Orthodox Jews to serve in the IDF. And that's been a huge problem across Israeli society, that the Orthodox effectively gets that free pass. And Gallant was trying to force the issue, and if he did, the Orthodox would have blown up their coalition and Netanyahu would be out of office. So it's ultimately politics driving the underpinnings of that. And Gallant was trying to broker a ceasefire, a hostage release, and making the Orthodox serve a bill to actually pass through their parliament. So I'm sad to see him not in office anymore.
Well, there are street protests in reaction to this decision by Netanyahu.
Yeah.
So clearly the internal politics, we haven't really seen any internal conflict, any internal reaction from Israelis in quite a while.
And so, yeah, we're now a month, almost 14 months past the October 7 attack. There's still hostages. Obviously, there's still parts of Gaza that are enemy held because that's where the hostages are being hidden. And now they're fighting up in Lebanon, south of the Litani River, and fighting against all these very prepared Hezbollah positions, and the IDF is taking casualties, pretty significant ones doing it. My worry is that they gave Hamas the exact fight they wanted in Gaza, caused a lot of civilian casualties. I know the IDF was very careful, tried to be strategic with the bomb, but you can only be so strategic and precise with 500,000 and 2,000-pound bombs. There's a lot of energy going off. Not to beat a dead horse, we tried to give them a flooding solution, which would have taken away the maneuver, taken away their underground storage, and made them move the hostages above ground, evening the playing field. They didn't do that. In Lebanon, Hezbollah is already very unpopular with the Sunnis, right? Because Hezbollah is Shia. So with the Sunnis, with the Druze, which is another Islamic sect, and with the Maronite Christians. Not happy that the big power actually in Lebanon is Hezbollah, this religious military force. But yet all the mauling, trying to hit targets that are Hezbollah, rockets that are being fired in Israel, I understand they need to do that. But if they'd supercharged, knowing that they had to do this, work with parts of the Lebanese armed forces to let them be the forward element, pay them. Pay what you have to do that. So it's Lebanese armed forces, even if it's with professional advisors, not to sound like a commercial for private military contracting, but that's how you apply force in a clever way, because you can't put IDF soldiers with the Lebanese armed forces. That's way too toxic. Fine. Let the Lebanese armed forces do the heavy lifting. And then if you have Israeli strikes in support of the Lebanese armed forces, that's a partnership, or a drone strike in partnership. It's not unilateral. Those Israelis, our southern border, our southern neighbor, just smashing Lebanese stuff again. That's the problem. I fear they're only making Hezbollah more stronger because they're the ones that are seen as resisting this foreign invasion.
And the Lebanese military has that capability?
No. I mean, they've been rife with sectarianism and corruption and all the rest. But you provide advisors that can provide intelligence, communications, medical logistics support, the key enablers. That's the model.
And
how it works.
interestingly, Netanyahu's messaging right from the beginning when the strikes began against Hezbollah, messaged to the Lebanese people.
Yeah.
Because he recognizes that they're a captive of Hezbollah.
They are. And the longer this takes and the more damage is done, the more it makes those people say, maybe those Hezbollah guys aren't so bad because they're at least fighting back.
So there seems to have been a pause the last couple of weeks, I think, between Iran and Israel, where, for the first time we had strikes going both ways, direct strikes, not through proxies.
Yep.
There seems to have been a bit of a pause.
Which is unprecedented.
Never
Completely
happened except under Joe Biden's watch.
Yeah.
Seems to be a little bit of a pause to see the result of the election in the United States, no doubt. So why don't give me the read on that, and let's get to the solution.
I have friends there that are expecting another big incoming from Iran, which is bad. So Israel smacked them about 2 weeks ago. It was 100 aircraft in the air with tanker support. I think there was even some U.S. tanker support for that. Because they had to fly across Jordanian and Iraqi airspace to get there, but they don't have the ability to do deep underground weapons. Okay, because the Iranians have just gone deeper and deeper, more concrete, more dirt. The U.S. is really the only one with the B-2 carrying a 30,000-pound, very deep penetrating bomb, actually built from an old naval gun barrel. To give you an idea of the quantity of steel to punch that deep, Israel can't do that. So they went after supposedly some security infrastructure, the IRGC, the MOIS, Besiege, Quds Force type forces. But the answer is to really empower the Iranian people, what they should do. For the cost of 2 F-35s, they missed a real opportunity when there's millions of people, women mostly, in the streets, the Women Life Freedom protests.
Under Obama.
No, this was under Biden, just 2 years ago.
Got it.
Yes, it started under Obama, 2009.
Right.
Again, because the women were sick of being forced to cover themselves, to not show, to not be any kind of free.
Mm-hmm.
No
education, right?
No education, yep. Right. They're protesting that, especially because some of them were arrested by the morality police and some of them were beaten to death.
Right.
To not capitalize on that, for the Biden administration to not capitalize on that, to say we support the people of Iran to govern themselves freely without having to live under mullahs. They don't want to live under mullahs. Take that away.
No messaging or anything.
Nothing. That started with Obama. Nothing. The Arab Spring started in Iran in 2009, not even in 2011. So yeah, the Democrats cannot tell me they're in favor of women's rights abroad when they allow and almost encourage Iranian women to get abused by religious police ceaselessly. So the answer is, because when you look at history, and I'm talking going back millennia, back to Alexander the Great or whatever, even the geography of Iran prevents or supports the defense, right? The Saragossa Mountains, it's like ringed by mountains. It's ringed by rugged terrain that makes very hard to invade. But it's the internal threat that the regime has a hard time dealing with. And the regime is extremely unpopular. The IRGC has a relationship to the Iranian military almost like the SS did to the Wehrmacht, to the Nazi, German army. Not popular, crushable. It's a fixable problem.
So, President-elect Donald Trump, how does he look at the war in Israel or against Israel and
it's a surrogate
come
war.
Up with solutions?
It's a surrogate war funded by Biden taking sanctions off of Iranian crude, releasing a whole bunch of frozen funds.
From day one.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. They gave them a snack thinking they were going to buy good behavior, and they got 3.5 years of constant combat.
So he clamps down on Iran again, like he did before. He had Iran in check. Donald Trump had Iran in check. So he returns to those policies right away?
Yes. I would have. There should be a sidebar meeting with the mullahs for the U.S. to lay out exactly what is expected of them, or what they can expect to receive.
And
I think it's almost similar when Reagan took office and we had hostages held for a year plus then. And the National Security Advisor said, if the hostages are not released by the time the president is driving from the Capitol to the White House, we're going to take you back to the Stone Age. And the message received, the hostages are released. I think that should be a similar message should be conveyed to the mullahs as well.
And 52 hostages left Iranian airspace at 12:01 p.m.
Yep.
So it wouldn't happen under the Carter administration.
Exactly.
The last snub. To
I
Jimmy
think
Carter.
someone should deliver that message to the mullahs.
So similar circumstances, somewhat. We've got hostages, right? Still
Yep.
in Gaza.
Some
And-
of them are American citizens, I believe.
Absolutely. And Benjamin Netanyahu has not had the full support of the U.S. government, and that's about to change too, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's been constant prevarication, just like a flag in the wind.
Right. And let's just lower hostilities, right? Every time,
Yep.
Israel gets hit from another side.
Kumbaya is not an answer.
Yeah, let's just let's just lower the temperature here a little bit. It's absurd. But that's what they've been dealing with throughout this war since October 7th, 2023. But so you see a fairly dramatic change quickly for Israel and their standing.
There
in these
can
wars.
be, and I think they're even open to some different solutions to actually secure Gaza and get the Palestinian people who are truly suffering from, imagine this, they're living kind of in Gaza was almost like an open air prison in some ways before the attack, and now they're in an open air prison that's taking shots and they're being pushed around by different military operations to avoid being blasted. It's very, very difficult. So building some camps and securing them and protecting the people from Hamas is super important so that no military operations will happen where those people are so they can try to put their lives back together.
Briefly, let's touch on China. Tell me, are we going to go back to the regimen of sanctions that Donald Trump had put in place? Or do you think he's going to work on his relationship with Xi and see where we go from there?
I will hope that they keep the lockdown on certain fabrication machinery, especially the need for making chips and some of the very, very high-end exotic electronics, to keep that controlled. I think Trump has rightly talked about tariffs. Remember before we went off, before they created the Federal Reserve in the early 1900s, the United States government was completely and only funded by tariffs. So imagine going back to a government like that, away from income tax, a much smaller, more reasonable, more responsive government. I think that's what this election shows, is that people want less U.S. government, less stupidity in their lives. Trump has to deliver that or his administration will be a failure.
And he's brilliantly used economic leverage in the past.
Yep.
So even the threat of tariffs against Chinese goods may get them
They
healed.
desperately need access to markets. They have a very export-based economy, yet it is not one based on internal consumption.
And any deal that Donald Trump is doing with China has got to address the fentanyl crisis. And they're pumping it in
100%.
through our southern border, correct?
Yes. The headline number is like 109,000 last year. The real number is 300,000 to 400,000 Americans died from basically poisoning.
Yeah.
From fentanyl poisoning, from precursor chemicals made, organized in China, shipped to Mexico or Venezuela, fabricated into fentanyl, pushed into America, and laced with various other drugs to hot rod them, and in many cases to make them lethal. So you have a kid that's, and I'm not condoning it, but it takes a line of coke to prepare for an exam or stay up all late to study, and they drop dead. Not a junkie, just terrible. And that happened 400,000 times last year in America. That's a problem that's unacceptable, and it must stop. So we lost 650,000 in the 4 years of the American Civil War. So in 2 years, we're losing more than the Civil War.
Yeah,
every 2 years.
Unacceptable.
Must stop.
So Donald Trump dodged a bullet.
Literally.
To see this victory. America now has dodged a bullet for generations because of Donald Trump's victory. So we are going to have a total realignment.
Yes. Well, we hope to. Now comes the blocking and tackling.
Yeah.
We put a new helm. We have a new guy at the helm.
Yeah.
He's got to turn the boat. And there's a lot of stuff that's got to happen to turn the boat.
And he's learned a lot, though. Personnel
I hope
decisions
so.
will be vastly different.
Personnel is policy.
Yeah.
And we will be here to make sure that they hear us.
On Off Leash. And look, I got to tell you, this has been a great initial tour of the world. Now, in this next Trump era, right here from Erik, like you're not going to get anyplace else. For now, this is Off Leash with Erik Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. Until next time.